Stelios. So for my degree, I did a bit of politics and philosophy and economics and stuff. And the stuff that I remember about the philosophy is that Greek people do it. Now, you do our philosophy here, and you're Greek. So is that your primary qualification, or do you have other qualifications on top of that?
I've studied economics and philosophy.
Right. Okay.
But not as politics, philosophy, and economics. I've studied them separately.
Right. Okay.
It's not just Greek people who do it. Greek people do it well.
Yes.
Also, Anglo-Saxon people do it well. And some people from the continent do it well, but not everyone.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And you've got what PhDs and
I have a PhD in philosophy. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what is a philosophy?
What do you mean? A philosophy or
Yes.
philosophy in
Yeah, I mean,
general?
what is it? If you
Well, you could say that it's a way to systematize answers to questions that most people ask. Like, if there's a God, if there's an afterlife, what is right or wrong? What is politically the right thing to do? Most people ask these questions, whether we are in control of our destiny and have free will or not. Most people ask these questions. In philosophy, you try to create a system where you give answers that cohere with each other.
Okay, so is it like the cultural version of technology? It's like discovering stuff.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily. It's most about asking questions that every human being asks and trying to give good answers to it. Because if you give bad answers to it, people die.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, we better get that right then.
Yes. It is imperative that we get it right.
Oh, okay. And it's also imperative for those of you who are joining us on YouTube that rather than staying on that cultural barren wasteland, with a bright red banner and the censorship, that you come and join us on the website. And to make that nice and easy for you, we've put a code up. There we go. This is Sargon because he's gone on holiday. So you now get a 50% discount for the next 3 months when you sign up to any tier. So come and join us off the YouTube. Right. So philosophy then. Take us through that. How are we supposed to think about it, and what's like a key question that we could be asking ourselves at this juncture?
Well, how to structure society. This is a philosophical
we're not doing that
question.
very well, right?
Yes, but this is why we need good answers. If we have bad answers, we have really bad outcomes. That's one question we should be asking. Also, another question we should be asking is, why the hell can't we basically stop thinking of ourselves in mechanistic terms? Because in contemporary society, I think this is the main problem, that in the philosophy of the last 4 centuries...
What does that mean, if you think of yourself in mechanistic terms?
Well, in every age, there's a myth. The myth is not necessarily a lie, but it is a backdrop of assumptions that affect most people's thinking. And frequently, technology has to do with it. And in the 17th century, there was a shift from the medieval way that people view things, as the world as being, let's say, a waiting place for the second coming. The whole world had a purpose, and people had to be members of particular society that tried to uphold particular moral code until the second coming. After that, we lost completely this notion of the world as having a purpose, and the whole idea is the machine. So we tend to view things in completely mechanistic terms, and this affects also how we view people. And also, people dislike this way of viewing things, but because the language is so much contaminated with mechanistic references, we cannot even formulate problems correctly, or we cannot even formulate problems in ways that make us stop thinking in mechanistic terms. Everything has become a machine. Human beings have no free will.
Including the people themselves.
Exactly. In the mind of most people, human beings have no free will. Everything is mechanistic. To understand how to structure societies, to understand how to structure the mechanism and how to make it...
To be fair, I think a lot of people don't have free will. They just watch TV and are programmed.
Well, that's a very big discussion. Right. I don't think that we have enough time to have it now, but right. I think that we do, to a very large extent.
I think we do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's more of autonomy. But let us keep that discussion for another time.
All right, okay. You take us through it then.
Yeah, so basically my series here is the Symposium. If you can have a look here, we have several philosophical discussions. So basically we have close to 36 episodes. We have recorded the 37th one, and we have several others on the pipeline.
He was on my university course. I like him.
Yes, the Machiavelli.
Yes.
Okay, it sounds like you had a better degree and a better education than most people do nowadays. Was it good?
Well, it was all right. I mean,
it was all right. Maybe in economics you had some grievances.
I mean, mainly at university was just something I did while I was sobering up.
Yeah. Okay. Now let us say one thing. So I think basically, if there's a purpose in the symposium, it's not just videos here or there. Maybe the series in which the symposium videos are done are completely chaotic, but there is an underlying order. It's like the A team. There's always a plan. Remember this?
I remember the A team, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always a plan. And the plan is to have a very sober diagnosis of what the hell is going wrong and to propose realistic solutions. Now, it's purposefully anti-sensationalist. I don't try to appeal to emotion because there's too much of that already.
Emotion?
Yes.
Yes.
I think we should think rationally.
Yes.
I don't know if that sounds controversial.
Is that different from women, or is it?
Well, I mean, you could say that most people frequently think emotionally.
Yes.
Let me phrase it in this way.
Okay, yes. Okay, fine.
Okay, so what we're doing basically is we have two kinds of videos, roughly. We have more, but there are two main streaks. One is ancient philosophy, and we are examining, for instance, things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. We have here this one. So the epic.
Carl did that one, didn't he?
Carl, Bo, and myself.
Yes.
So we are examining basically one of the oldest epics in the world, and we are saying what, for instance, we are explaining the trajectory of Gilgamesh's life and his conquest of wisdom.
Have you read Gilgamesh, Connor? Because he's like Uber Chad number one here.
No, I haven't. Though I do know when this was being filmed, I think this was the first symposium you filmed in the new studio.
Yes.
And obviously before, a bit of behind the scenes for people. The old studio, there was just a curtain separating the writer's room from the studio. So anytime someone would have to record something, the lights would have to go off and you'd have to sit in silence like it was an exam hall or something. And because there are now two studios, it frees up a lot more time to have for the premium content. And I remember Bo and Carl walking out midway through Gilgamesh, about 2 hours in, and we all just looked up and went, "Oh, did it go all right? Did it?" And they were like, "Nope, still going. Just going to get a cup of tea and that." So
3.5 hours.
Yeah. So you must have had a seriously rigorous discussion.
That's an epic. That is.
Yes, and it was really good. I think it's the lengthiest Lotus video so far.
Oh.
There are people who have plans of having lengthier discussions. Let me just say.
Well, that sounds like a challenge now.
Yes.
I'm going to do a deep dive on Peruvian interest rates and
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are examining ancient philosophy. We have other videos as well, like, for instance, Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, Part 1. We have here, yes, we're talking about basically Aristotle's ethics. We have also Part 2. We have here one video called Discovering the Logos, where I did with Bo. It's Symposium number 10. It's the Logos in the Pre-Socratics, which I think is the most underappreciated symposium I've done already. Because we are trying to understand what is at the basis of Western civilization. Jordan Peterson constantly talks about the Logos, but he talks about it more in the context of theology and the Bible and that tradition. We are trying to go a step back and say what this notion was and what this notion meant in ancient times. And this is really important because what we nowadays mean by reason is completely different from what the Logos is supposed to mean. We have.
So are we doing it better, or the ancients doing it better?
In this respect, the ancients are doing it better.
Okay.
Yeah, because for instance, there is, when we speak of reason nowadays, we just speak of instrumental reason. Everything is mechanistic. As you have a purpose, this purpose is not necessarily judged as moral or immoral by reason, but all reason has to do is to discover the means to achieve that purpose. In this tradition, the Logos is much more evaluatively rich. It is supposed to be the noble element of the soul. And it's something that it separates us from the rest of the material world, and it contains a drive upwards. And this means that basically the whole Western civilization is based, at least in its birth, on the idea that the material realm it does not exhaust the world. And this is one of the major differences between the ancient worldview or ancient worldviews, most of them, because there were materialists back then, and now how most people view things nowadays. And let me just say one example, which may be a bit weird. It's things like, for instance, the Symposium on Love that I did with Connor.
That was one of my favorite videos that I've done since I've joined here, genuinely. It was a really rich discussion, because a lot of the time people don't think about the definition. We just see it as a process. And I think, and this is something that you were talking about earlier, the mechanistic understanding of how we interact with people is something that has infected Zoomers unbelievably, as to where, and I was talking about this at an event that I went to last night at Exeter University. All Zoomers act on the presupposition that all relationships are transactional, and it's always about relative to your self-conception and how much value another person can provide to you. And at any time that they aren't providing enough value, you can just sever that relationship. It's never worded in the terms of sentiment and what specific criteria involuntarily conjure up that sentiment out of you. So we looked at it in the history of philosophy and looking at the definitions of love from, we did Plato, Aristotle, C.S. Lewis, and we even did a bit of like modern conceptions of it, and we came to a really rich and wholesome definition by the end of it. And I'm really, it was my first one with you, actually. I'm really glad we had that
yes
chat.
And also it shows how, if we really familiarize ourselves with the language of previous eras, not because they're previous but because they're different, we're better able to understand the differences and commonalities between worldviews.
It's also a means of re-enchantment. That's the really important thing. It adds the rich texture to life if you understand this sort of stuff.
It's a very metaphysically rich conception of love in an age when most people view love as something that is basically neurons firing in your brain and creating you this image that you love a person, whereas in fact you have biological pressure that is leading you to be attached to someone. It's all this idea that we're radically mistaken about how we view ourselves in lives, and we need someone to come and tell us what is actually going on, which is very cynical. Now, I'm not a very cynical person. I am one of the office's optimists, and cynicism just doesn't bode well with me. And I think that some re-enchantment is necessary and also good in some respects. I can
this
see.
Is very deep, isn't it? This is very.
It was fantastic. It also came around Valentine's Day, so it was topically relevant.
Oh, how lovely!
Yeah.
Stelios does plan his content very well, I will say. Because we've spoken before about how you're not just like planning scattershot pieces of philosophy. You're trying to create a tapestry of thought that has a kind of continuity that can help nourish the viewers and build them a new frame of reference to fortify themselves against that instrumentalist, metaphysical, very alienating worldview that we take as like a cultural presupposition.
Exactly, yeah. And we don't only do ancient stuff. We're trying to examine what goes on right now. So right now, I think we are in the state of ecophobia. This is a symposium we did with Carl when we were talking.
Is that oikophobia?
Yeah, I mean, I pronounce it ecophobia. Some people pronounce it oikophobia. You won't get Greeks, modern Greeks at least, to pronounce it this way. But it's
so this is
respectful.
disliking oiks. The people you see.
Well, let me just say what this is for the audience. So we are discussing with Carl Roger Scruton's idea of ecophobia, and also a very excellent book by Benedict Beckelt called Western Self-Contempt. We're discussing it here. So ecophobia is the idea where people have a bias against their own countries.
Oh, an outgroup preference.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've only ever so I've traveled around the world, and I've only ever seen that in the West. I just don't see it anywhere else.
That is why we're talking about Western anti-Westernism, and we see this trend to worrying. Let's say it is a worryingly large trend. Let's say there are many people in Western societies who think that the only way to stand out is to just constantly blame their countries.
This is the instinct of the decolonization movement, which is retroactively applied to countries that themselves were not colonized, but are accused of being colonial, even though they upgraded the infrastructure and the morality of various countries that they occupied. And this is something I chatted to Doug Stokes about in a recent book club on the website. And the reason, and you keep talking about having not just the importance of asserting objective truths and building a heuristic for what is truth, but because it has adverse outcomes if you don't follow those. His point in his book against decolonization was, it's all well and good for us to be squabbling at home and arguing with the critical race theorists and spending time refuting them, but it's a giant distraction when we've got rising powers like the Chinese that are very happy that we're committing cultural suicide because it stops us from being prosperous. And even though they're committing demographic suicide at the same time, if we kill ourselves faster by not having enough conviction to defend our own nation, they win by default. And so stuff like this is really important to reconstitute the reason of why we should unapologetically defend our civilization.
So
yeah, we're kind of doing the opposite, aren't we? We're trying to on a mission to destroy it as fast as possible.
Yeah, we're being gaslit into thinking that it's not worth losing, not worth keeping as we're losing it. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
not worth maintaining.
Yeah.
Now, in order to understand how to give realistic solutions, as opposed to have the, let's say, illusion of giving solutions, just in order to say something that will create lots of impressions on Twitter, we are appealing to some really basic core stuff in the history of Western political thought, like Politics of Aristotle Part 1, Part 2, that we did with Harry. Also, this is a massively underappreciated symposium. We're discussing about the main constitutions, the main unmixed constitutions, and what Aristotle says is the pros and cons of each.
Is Aristotle the one who didn't write anything down? So
No, that's Socrates.
oh, that was Socrates. Okay,
Yeah.
It was Socrates, and then it was, which one was it? Was it then Plato?
Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are the
okay.
basic trinity of ancient Greek philosophy of the
I
classical
see.
world.
Yes. Okay.
And we also have discourses on Levi. Here we have the essential Machiavelli.
I like this one. Yeah.
We are talking about his greatest hits, like
He's a very practical man. This.
yeah,
one.
like we do need another hero. What's justice got to do with it? What's justice but a second-hand virtue? And also simply the best, written about the Roman Republic. So just watch this, and next week we're going to have round 2. Part 2 is completely different. It's not very philosophical. We're talking about war. Imagine you have Carl and Bo there talking about war.
And this is a short one. This is only 2 hours and 48 minutes long.
No, this is, I think, one of the longest one. Yeah, so basically, this is a really, really, really interesting one. By all means, check it out. Now, this is, I think, one of the most important symposium videos because it has to do with language and linguistic and conceptual subversion. I think basically that this is one of the most, let's say, important videos to watch if you want to enter into the symposium series. It is a bit slow, but it is deliberately slow because we're talking about complex ideas. And this is about how language is being corrupted. And this is precisely what I mean when I was talking about it being anti-sensationalist. We're explaining how words function and how language functions, especially in the public sphere, and how the meanings of concepts change. And I'm talking there about a kind of woke trap that is being set for people to fall into. And this can be explained in a nutshell in the following way. So speech does not occur in a vacuum. Speech is always speech between people with a particular language that has evolved as a living organism in a particular society. And in that society, there are, let's say, terms that have symbolic power because most people attach a very positive or very negative meaning with respect to them. We have, let's say, thin concepts like good and evil, right or wrong. If you say someone is evil, that has some force. That if you say that they wear a particular kind of dress, doesn't have. But there are also other terms like, fascism, liberty, community, all these terms. So what I'm saying is that basically, post-Cold War, we have, by the way, I did this with Bo and Josh. What we're saying that after after the Cold War ended, the terms liberty and democracy have assumed a symbolic status. So what we have is a really militant and conceptually aggressive woke left that is trying to get its political opponents to identify as illiberal and anti-democratic. So if they do this, some people will do that on principle, and they will identify themselves as such. That doesn't mean that they're falling into the trap. But other people fall into that trap mindlessly. Why? Because they don't examine the way that meanings change. So, for instance, they don't understand what the concept of liberty means,
Yes.
and what lots of traditions of conceptualizing liberty are.
Yes.
They don't understand it, and they mindlessly, or they rush to accept the way that their opponent is setting the terms of the debate.
Yes.
And that's a bit
Yes.
why is
I've
this
caught up at last. Yes.
Yeah. And why that is an issue, because let's say you lose if you start identifying in ways that
Yes.
the majority of the population thinks they are, let's say,
You're fighting on their
symbolic.
conceptual battleground, not your own.
Yes, you have one side, like the woke side, that is completely, that they don't give, and you know what they don't give, a donkey's,
Yes.
whatever, about democracy or liberty.
Oh, no.
They try to portray themselves as being the defenders of them. Why? Because they have the other side identifying themselves in such ways. So we constantly see this tendency of people who say, no, we need to fight X, Y, and Z.
So, I mean, presumably this
In the
is
name of
exactly what's
A, B, and C.
happening right now with this whole Russell Brand thing, where one side is trying to portray themselves as the protector of women and virtue and all that kind of stuff. It's just a power play.
Despite already having permitted the exact kind of sexually liberative philandering that made Russell Brand's career before this.
Yes.
And based on the consent framework, they didn't have any kind of moral cudgel to say, actually, maybe you shouldn't be sleeping with hundreds of women, and therefore risking the idea that you're going to spurn some of them, and that they maybe weaponize either as an accurate or a false accusation later down the line. They didn't care about those moral prohibitions until it became politically expedient, and then they can position themselves on the side of, we were actually always defending the sacredness of women.
Well, I don't know exactly about this specific case. I don't know about the specifics of this case, but what I think is really interesting is that people who made accusations about him, they said that right now, Russell Brand is associated with particular views, because they want to smear these views. But no one seems to be talking about the fact that it seems that when he allegedly did what he was accused of doing, he seemed to have been a leftist back then.
Yes.
No one talks about this. Now, let's talk about...
just a quick point here. It's because I used to think that I could think, but actually listening to you, I'm starting to realize that there's actually this whole deep chasm of thinking, and I probably need to do some philosophizing, I think, and some watching of this.
Yeah, thank you.
Because there's a lot of thinking going on here, and I'm trying to keep up as best I can. So I get excited when I get a little bit that I can.
Yes, I'm very flattered to hear this.
Good.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, one thing, patriotism. One thing, people who think that patriotism is a bad word have no business running any nation and any country. So they could go do something
we don't have anyone
themselves.
in charge who thinks that patriotism is a good thing.
Yes, but
globalists.
Okay, so they should go and do something with themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one, surviving disagreement is a really interesting discussion I had with Josh.
Okay.
We're saying basically that disagreement is something that most people did. Most respectful and civilized people did courteously. So, for instance, you can definitely have people in the Rothbardian, who are debating.
Like Rothbard.
Murray Rothbard. Yes, with classical liberals and stuff, or classical liberals and conservatives. You can have really lovely disagreements. It doesn't mean that we're going to kill each other. Interestingly, it's some other people who portray any kind of disagreement as a destruction of their delicate sentimentality, who are actually against dialogue and against disagreement. So I don't think we should fall into the trap of thinking that just occasionally...
But that's like the entire power structure in the left at the moment is in that.
Yes, and we should expose it and talk to people. And this is what is absolutely great about the Lotus Eaters, that we are addressing people who don't get this message from the legacy media.
Well, not just that, it's the... And I really enjoyed this one, not because necessarily it brought a load of new knowledge outside of my framework, because obviously I understand quite a lot of what you just said there, but it's because it had the tone and tenor of the kind of conversations we have off air as friends.
Yes.
And it had the relaxed atmosphere of almost like Tolkien and Lewis sitting in a pub in Oxford, just waxing philosophical over a drink and a pipe. Yourself and Josh had a really rich and interesting discussion. It had a really nice pace, and we have those exact kind of discussions off air, which is why you're so capable to bring the best out of all of us in your series. So
thank you very much.
That's all right, mate.
So, and let's talk about debates. We are having, for instance, also debates on the show. Here, I'm debating with Thomas about modernity. Well, my position is that when your hand is in pain, you don't chop your hand. You try to extract the growth that pains you. Now, saying that you should chop the hand is a bit. I think it goes too far. Let me say it goes too far. Another debate I had with Carl is debating classical liberalism.
This was very good.
Yes, when this is one of the good ones. And I really liked it. And to be fair, this is what is a bit deceptive about it. Towards the end, there is surprisingly more disagreement than the title suggests. And the reason why we do this is because basically what happened is that I think that both Carl and myself, we deeply care about liberty and community. And there's an issue with value monism. There's an issue with the idea that there is one and only one fundamental value deep down, and everything has to boil down to it. And this is particularly problematic when you try to think of how to, let's say, safeguard your values, because we, unfortunately, as human beings, let's say, we have the tendency to think that there is one and only one value, the one that is currently under threat. So when, for instance, right now in the West, we have communities that are under threat, there is a tendency to think that only community is the one and only value, which leads us to forget the values of liberty and the values of, let's say, within some limits, individualism. On the other hand, there were some other errors when we were thinking of, for instance, no, liberty is under threat. The only way to safeguard this is by, let's say, having a society that is focusing on freedom as opposed to community. And this is what leads society to disintegration, because you need a kind
extreme
of
liberalism.
Yes.
Yes, extreme individuality. Okay.
And this is why I have this conceptions of political freedom here, because liberalism is an umbrella term. Like many other notions, it's an umbrella term. If we mean by liberalism the promotion and safeguard of liberty, then the question is, what do we mean by liberty? There are many, many, many answers. Here, for instance, we have Symposium 2, and I purposefully started with this. It's the first political symposium we did. We're talking about the negative, the positive, and the Republican tradition. There are many more, but I'm just introducing some complexity into it, because when people say that I am for liberty, it's not by any means transparent what they're saying. And let me just finish with these two links. We have this on value pluralism. This is symposium number 35, where Carl and myself are talking about this. We're trying to somehow argue for a position like, you could say, conservative liberalism, at least I do, where you try to say that you have fundamentally incommensurable values that deep down may be incompatible. Community and liberties, they're deep down incompatible. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and find ways of accommodating both in your moral compass.
Yes, I mean, there could be a settlement that works for both.
Yeah. And final one, let me just say, because I like being optimistic, and Bo and myself did some Anglo-Saxon work here. And what I mean by that is that you could say that the Anglo-Saxon temperament in philosophy is very much skeptical of generalizations, because it is very much focused on empirical fact. It is completely foreign to the spirit according to which, if facts contradict the theory, so worse for the facts. So what we're doing here is we are dispelling both the narrative of infinite progress and the narrative on infinite decline. And we're saying that, well, we can find tendencies that confirm both, but they are a bit low resolution, and history is much more contingent than that. And ultimately, I think that it's on our hands to improve the future. I don't think that we are doomed to an inevitable decline.
It's all very clever, isn't it?
I would like to think so myself. Yeah.
Marvelous stuff. Marvelous. Thank you very much, Stelios. That was absolutely brilliant.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Symposium episodes, this one on value pluralism. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.